buried my father. And months later I found out he was still alive. That sentence still doesn't feel real when I say it out loud, because this isn't a story about grief alone. It's a story about betrayal so deep, it rewrote everything I thought I knew about my own family. Before all of this, my life was painfully normal. My father was the kind of man you never worried about. He was steady, predictable, always there. He woke up early, paid bills before they were due, locked the doors twice every night. He wasn't warm, but he was reliable. And to me that felt safer than affection. In our family, love wasn't spoken, it was maintained. If something broke, he fixed it. If money was tight, he found a way. If things felt uncertain, he made them feel solid again. That's why what happened next destroyed me. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I remember because Tuesdays meant nothing special. No bad feeling. No warning. Just another day. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. Are you Robert Hayes' son? Yes, I said. That's my dad. There was a pause. I'm calling from Mercy General Hospital. Something inside me dropped instantly. There's been an emergency involving your father. I stood up without realizing it. Yes, my dad. Calling from Mercy General Hospital. Emergency involving your father. My coffee spilled across the table, but I didn't notice. What kind of emergency? I asked. Another pause. I'm very sorry, the man said carefully. Your father was pronounced dead early this morning. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt hollow. I kept saying, that's not possible, like repeating it would change the outcome. I had spoken to him the night before. He sounded normal. Calm. The man kept apologizing, kept explaining. I barely heard him. When the call ended, I stood there holding my phone, staring at nothing, waiting for reality to come back. It didn't. Calling my mother was worse. The moment she heard my voice, she knew. She collapsed into sobs before I could finish the sentence. By the end of the day, the news had spread faster than I could process it. Family, friends, co-workers, everyone saying the same thing. I'm so sorry. He was a good man. If you need anything. I nodded. I thanked them. I felt like an actor reading lines I didn't understand. The next 3 days passed in fragments: paperwork, phone calls, arrangements, people filling the house with food we didn't eat and words that didn't help. At night, I lay awake thinking about the last few weeks before his death. How secretive he'd become. How often he'd taken phone calls late at night. How obsessed he was with accounts, documents, backup plans. Once, half joking, I'd said, "You planning to disappear or something?" He smiled. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. The funeral was quiet, gray sky, black clothes, controlled grief. I stood beside my mother as the casket was lowered into the ground, trying to convince myself that the man inside was really my father. Something felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. I told myself grief messes with your head. That night, after everyone left, I went into his study. Everything was untouched, perfectly organized. I tried to access his computer. Password protected. I didn't know it. That bothered me more than it should have. 2 days after we buried him, a letter arrived from the bank. Account pending review. I called immediately. After verifying my identity, the woman on the line hesitated. Sir, I'm seeing activity on your father's accounts after the reported date of death. My stomach dropped. That's impossible, I said. He's dead. There was silence. I can't provide details yet, she said carefully, but there were logins and transfers. I hung up shaking. That was the moment something inside me shifted, because grief feels heavy, loss feels empty, but this felt wrong. And deep down, before I was ready to admit it, I felt something far more terrifying than sadness. I felt doubt. After that call with the bank, I didn't tell my mother everything. Not because I wanted to hide the truth, but because I didn't know what the truth was yet. How do you tell a grieving woman that the man she just buried might still be moving money? So I did what I'd learned from my father my whole life. I stayed quiet. I stayed careful. And I started paying attention. The house felt different after the funeral. Not emptier, just unfamiliar, like the walls were listening. I went back into my father's study the next morning. Not to snoop. That's what I told myself, just to organize things. That's how lies always start. Small. Reasonable. I opened drawers I'd never opened before. Found folders labeled in his handwriting, clean, precise, almost obsessive. Insurance, investments, emergency plans. One folder caught my attention. It wasn't labeled at all. Inside were copies of documents I didn't recognize, account numbers I'd never seen, and a printed email thread. Most of it was mundane. Financial jargon. Transfer confirmations. But one line stood out. Once everything is settled, I won't be reachable. No date.no context. Just that sentence. I sat there longer than I should have, staring at it, feeling something cold settle in my chest. That afternoon, I went back to the bank in person. The building smelled like carpet cleaner and stressed that I explain the situation again. Provided the death certificate. Signed more papers than I could count. The manager, a man in his 50s with tired eyes, leaned back in his chair. There's nothing criminal indicated yet, he said carefully, but there are inconsistencies. Inconsistencies how? I asked that he chose his words slowly. Your father moved significant amounts of money shortly before his death. And some, shortly after. I laughed once. Instead, he slid a paper across the desk. Dates, amounts, destinations. Some transfers were small. Almost forgettable. Others were not. What accounts are these going to? I asked. External accounts, he said. Not in his name. That was the first time I felt fear instead of confusion. That night, my mother asked me if I thought we'd be okay financially. We will be, I said automatically that I didn't know if it was true. She nodded, then hesitated. He was worried lately, she said quietly. Did he ever talk to you about money? I thought of the folders, the late night calls. That strange text he sent before he died. No, I lied. Nothing serious. She looked relieved that I hated myself for lying. The next few days were filled with paperwork. Death does that. It leaves behind a trail of signatures and forms that make grief feel procedural. I requested hospital records. The response came back delayed. Incomplete. Cause of death cardiac arrest. Time of arrival early morning. Time of death shortly after. But there was no clear medical history explaining it.no long-term condition. No warning signs. I called the hospital. They told me the attending physician was no longer on staff. The nurse who admitted him on leave. Every answer led to another closed door. Then there was the woman. The friend, listed as the person who identified him. I asked everyone. Family. Co-workers. Old neighbors. No one knew her. My father didn't have secrets like that. At least. I didn't think he did. One evening, while sorting through old mail, I found a prepaid phone hidden inside a drawer in the garage. It was turned off. My hands shook as I powered it on. No contacts. No photos. Just one recent outgoing call. The number wasn't saved. I stared at it, heart pounding, wondering how many lives could be hidden inside one device. It was quiet. Empty. Wind moving gently through the trees. I stood there looking at my father's name etched into stone. Birth date, death date. A timeline carved in certainty. I told myself this was real, that grief was making me paranoid. But as I stood there, one thought kept repeating itself, slow and deliberate. If he really planned for everything, why does nothing about this make sense? That night, I finally logged into his email. I shouldn't have been able to, but I guessed the password. Not his birthday, not mine. A phrase he used to say when things felt uncertain. Just in case. The inbox opened, hundreds of emails. Most normal. Then I filtered by recent. My breath caught. There were messages sent after his reported death. Short. Efficient. Transfers confirmed. Documents received. One message wasn't financial. It read. Everything is going according to plan. Stay low. I closed the laptop slowly. I sat there in the dark, listening to my own breathing, realizing something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't chaos. This was planning. And the man who taught me to always have a backup plan had one I never knew about. I didn't cry that night. I felt something colder. A realization forming, piece by piece, whether I wanted it to or not. My father didn't just leave us. He orchestrated his disappearance. And whatever he was running from, or toward, he took our lives with him. Once I saw those emails, I couldn't unsee them. Every memory I had of my father started rearranging itself in my head. Moments that once felt harmless now carried weight. Every pause. Every glance. Every just in case. I didn't confront my mother. I didn't confront anyone. Because I still didn't know how big this was. So I did the only thing that made sense. I followed the money. I took a week off work, claiming I needed time to grieve. No one questioned it. Grief is convenient that way. It gives you privacy. Every morning, after my mother left the house to stay with relatives, I sat at the dining table with my laptop, papers spread out like evidence at a crime scene. Bank statements, transfer receipts, insurance documents. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. My father hadn't just moved money randomly. He'd structured it. Small amounts at first. Always below thresholds that would raise suspicion. Then larger transfers once patterns were established. It was careful. Deliberate, professional. I contacted the bank again, this time asking about the destination accounts. Point one was overseas. Another tied to a shell company with no real address. The manager didn't look surprised anymore. Your father knew exactly what he was doing, he said quietly. That sentence hit harder than anything else, because if this was intentional, then the man I buried wasn't the man I thought I knew. At night, I lay awake replaying conversations from the past year. The way he'd insisted we update beneficiaries. How he pushed my mom to sign documents she didn't fully read. How he'd suddenly started talking about starting over. I thought it was midlife crisis talk. It wasn't. It was preparation. A week later, another letter arrived. This one wasn't from the bank. It was from an insurance company. Claim status under review. My heart started racing before I even opened it. The payout was substantial. Enough to explain everything. I called immediately. After verifying details, the agent paused. There's a complication, she said. What kind of complication? I asked. Another letter, insurance company, claim status under review. Heart started racing, opened it, substantial payout. Agent paused, complication. There was a recent change to the policy, she explained. Beneficiaries were updated shortly before your father's passing. To who? I asked. Another pause. Not to you or your mother. I closed my eyes. Then who? She gave me a name. I didn't recognize it. When I asked for more information, she refused. Privacy laws. Of course. Every truth came wrapped in rules. That night, I confronted my mother about the insurance. She looked genuinely shocked. He never told me, she said. We planned everything together, or at least I thought we did. For the first time since this started, I believed her completely. Whatever this was, he hadn't planned it with us. He'd planned it away from us. The prepaid phone burned in my pocket for days before I finally used it. I waited until the house was empty, sat in my car, took a deep breath, and dialed the number. It rang twice. Then someone answered. Hello. The voice was male. Older. Calm. Not my father. I didn't speak. Who is this? The man asked. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but my mind was suddenly clear. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was a network. People, plans, backup lives. I drove back to the cemetery that same evening. Stood there again, staring at the headstone. I realized something then that made my chest tighten. This grave wasn't closure. It was a cover. Someone had signed paperwork. Someone had confirmed identity. Someone had made sure the system believed my father was dead. That kind of thing doesn't happen by accident. I went home and opened his laptop again. This time I searched for travel, flights, hotels, passports. Most results were old. Then I found a scanned document hidden inside an unrelated folder. A passport application. Not my father's real name. A new one. Issued months before his death. I felt sick. I sat there in silence for a long time, letting the weight of it press down on me. My father hadn't died. He had left, and he had made sure that when he did, we would mourn him, protect his story, and never come looking. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the realization that every tear we shed, every night my mother cried herself to sleep, every time someone told me, he'd want you to be strong. He had anticipated it, and chosen it anyway. I didn't know where he was yet. But I knew one thing for certain. My father was alive, and whatever he ran from, he decided we were acceptable losses. Knowing the truth didn't bring relief. It brought fear. Because once you accept that someone you buried is still alive, the world stops feeling solid. Every rule you trusted suddenly feels negotiable. I stopped sleeping properly. Every unfamiliar sound outside the house made my heart race. Every unknown number on my phone felt like a threat. I started asking myself questions I never thought I'd have to ask. If my father was capable of this, what else was he capable of? I went back to the hospital where he was declared dead. The same hallways, the same cold, polished floors. I asked for records. Cause of death. Body identification. The nurse looked uncomfortable. There was no autopsy, she said. That stopped me. No autopsy, I repeated. She shook her head. The body was released quickly. Family request. Family request. But not ours. I requested to see the attending physician. After waiting nearly an hour, a tired-looking man sat across from me. He kept his answers short. The patient arrived unresponsive. No pulse, declared deceased. Did you personally verify identity? I asked. He hesitated. The ID matched, he said. Who provided it? Another pause. A colleague from a different department brought it in. That was it.no name.no record.no trail. Just enough procedure to satisfy the system. I left the hospital feeling colder than when I entered. Someone had walked a body through the system wearing my father's name. Or worse. There had been no body at all. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to ground myself. My phone buzzed. An email. Unknown sender. No subject line. Just one sentence in the body. Stop digging. It won't bring him back. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. They knew I was looking. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Instead, I forwarded it to a private investigator I'd contacted earlier that week. I hadn't expected much from him, just another voice confirming I wasn't insane. He called me within minutes. This isn't random, he said. Whoever sent this is watching your movements digitally. That night, I disconnected everything. Laptop. Wi-Fi. Smart devices. I slept with the lights on. The investigator started digging where I couldn't. Financial trails, false identities, recent border crossings. 3 days later, he called again. I think I found him, he said. My chest tightened. Where? Not under his name, he replied. But someone with his age, his habits, and a very familiar spending pattern. Another country. A quiet place. No extradition treaties. The kind of place people go when they want to disappear without disappearing too far. I asked for proof. He sent me a photo. Blurry, taken from a distance. A man sitting at an outdoor cafe. Gray hair. Same posture. Same way of holding a cup. I stared at it until my vision blurred. That was him. Alive. Relaxed. While we were drowning, I felt something break inside me. Not explode, just collapse. I thought about my mother, still sleeping on the couch because the bed felt too empty. About the condolences card stacked unopened. About the grave that now felt like a lie carved into stone. I realized then that grief had been easier than this. Because grief assumes innocence. This demanded accountability. I wanted to confront him immediately, but the investigator stopped me. If he knows you're close, he said, he'll disappear again. Permanently. So I waited, and waiting did something dark to me. I started rehearsing conversations in my head. Angry ones, quiet ones, questions I didn't want answers to. Why us? Why now? Was the money worth erasing your own family? But the question that haunted me the most came quietly, late at night. What if he never planned to come back? What if this wasn't temporary survival, but permanent abandonment? I stood in front of the mirror one evening and barely recognized myself. I wasn't mourning anymore. I was hunting. And deep down, I knew. When I finally faced my father again, one of us would leave that conversation completely changed. I didn't tell my mother. Not yet. How do you look someone in the eyes and say, the man you buried is alive, and he chose to leave? I told myself I was protecting her. But the truth was, I wasn't ready to watch her break again. So I carried the weight alone. Days passed. Normal days on the surface. I went to work, answered emails, nodded at condolences. All while knowing my father was sitting in a cafe somewhere, sipping coffee under a different name. The investigator kept updating me. He hasn't moved, he said. Same routine. Same location. That terrified me more than if he'd been running, because it meant he felt safe, too safe. I started noticing how carefully my father had erased himself, his old phone number, disconnected. Social accounts, deleted. Government records, clean. This wasn't a panic move. It was a blueprint. I found an old notebook of his while packing things away. Most pages were blank, except one. A single line written neatly in the middle. If it works, don't look back. I closed the notebook and sat on the floor for a long time. That sentence didn't belong to a desperate man. It belonged to someone who had already made peace with leaving. I began preparing for the confrontation without knowing when it would happen. What would I say first? Do I call him Dad? Do I scream? Do I stay calm? Every version felt wrong. The investigator warned me again. Once you confront him, there's no undoing it. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I was already past undoing. One evening, my mother finally asked the question I'd been dreading. Do you ever feel like something about his death doesn't make sense? I froze. She wasn't accusing, she wasn't suspicious, she was searching. I sat beside her. There are things I'm still trying to understand, I said carefully. She looked down at her hands. He always said he'd never leave us, she whispered. He promised. I swallowed hard. That promise echoed in my head all night. Because somewhere, my father was living proof that promises can be rehearsed, and still be lies. The next morning, the investigator sent me something new. A flight receipt. Booked recently. Leaving the country. 2 days away. My father was moving again. I didn't think. I booked a ticket on the next flight to the same city. No plan. No script. Just a need to look the man who raised me in the eyes. The flight was long and silent. I kept imagining him seeing me walk toward him. Would he recognize me instantly? Or would he pretend not to? When I landed, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I know you're here. My stomach dropped. Another message followed. You shouldn't have come. I didn't reply. I turned off my phone and took a cab to the address the investigator had given me. A modest apartment building. Nothing flashy. I stood across the street, watching the entrance. Minutes felt like hours. Then the door opened. A man stepped out, older, thinner, but unmistakable. My father. He didn't look over his shoulder. Didn't rush. He walked like someone who believed the past couldn't catch him. I followed at a distance. Every step felt unreal. This was the man whose funeral I attended, the man whose name was etched into stone, and yet, he was breathing, walking, alive. He stopped at a small park and sat on a bench. I stood there for a moment, heart pounding, then crossed the street. I sat down beside him. He didn't flinch. Didn't turn. Just stared straight ahead and said calmly, I wondered how long it would take you. I didn't know what I expected him to say. An apology. An excuse, maybe shock, but not that. I wondered how long it would take you. His voice was calm. Too calm. Like this wasn't a confrontation. Just an overdue meeting. I stared at him. Up close, the years showed more clearly, wrinkles I didn't remember. Eyes that had learned how not to look back. You're dead? I said. He finally turned to face me. Legally, he replied. Yes. That word hit me harder than any insult could have. Legally. As if death were paperwork. As if grief were a clerical error. My hands were shaking. Moments passed before I could speak again. Why? I asked. He sighed, leaning back on the bench. You wouldn't understand, he said. That sentence broke something in me. You didn't even try, I said. You let us bury you. He looked away. It was cleaner that way. Cleaner. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Do you have any idea what you did to Mom? I asked. To me? He stayed silent, not guilty, not defensive, just resolved. I was drowning, he finally said. Debt. Deals gone wrong. People who don't forgive. I waited. He didn't mention us. I needed a reset, he continued. A chance to live without looking over my shoulder. So you erased us? I asked. He turned back to me then. You were collateral, he said quietly. That word, collateral, echoed in my head. I stood up. Say that again. You didn't? Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. New identity papers, new name, new life. I'm free now, he said. I felt sick, free, while we were trapped inside his lie. Did you ever think about coming back? I asked. He hesitated just a second, but it was enough. No, he admitted, that was the moment. Not when he faked his death. Not when he stole the money, that moment, because it meant the story had an ending. And we were never in it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. I should turn you in, I said. You won't, he replied. Why are you so sure? I asked. He stood up slowly. Because you still think of me as your father. He was wrong, but I didn't say it. He walked away, leaving me on that bench, surrounded by people who had no idea what had just happened. I sat there for a long time, replaying everything. Then my phone buzzed again. A message from my mother. I had a dream about him last night. He looked peaceful. I closed my eyes. And for the first time, I understood something painful and final. The man she loved was dead. The man I met today was someone else entirely. I didn't follow him. I watched his back disappear into the crowd and realized something terrifying. I wasn't angry enough to chase him. That scared me more than anything else, because anger means you still care. I walked the city for hours afterward, letting the noise swallow me. Cars, voices, life continuing like nothing had happened. My father was alive, and the world didn't stop for it. When I got back to the hotel, I finally checked my phone. Missed calls, messages, all from my mother. I stared at them without opening any. How do you explain this kind of truth to someone who's barely holding herself together? That night I didn't sleep, not because I was afraid, but because my brain wouldn't let go of one thought. He planned this. Every step, every lie. Which meant he had practiced living without us long before he ever left. The next morning the investigator called. Did you see him? He asked. Yes. Did he say anything incriminating? No. There was a pause. Then, that was intentional. I knew. Nothing my father did was careless. I flew home that evening. The house felt heavier than before. My mother was in the kitchen when I walked in. She smiled when she saw me. That smile nearly broke me. "You look tired," she said. "I am," I replied. She reached out and held my hand. "Grief does strange things to people," she said softly. "You'll be okay." I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded. That night, I stood alone in my father's study. Everything was exactly how he left it. Books arranged neatly, desk wiped clean. Except one thing, that a small envelope taped beneath the desk drawer. I don't know how I'd missed it before. Inside was cashed out a lot of it, and a note, just 3 words, "For emergencies only." I sat down on the floor and laughed until my chest hurt. This was his version of care. A financial safety net. After emotional abandonment. I realized then that part of me had still been hoping he'd call, hoping he'd explain, hoping he'd regret it, but regret requires attachment, and he had already let go. The next day, my mother finally opened one of the condolence letters. She read it slowly, then folded it carefully. "People keep telling me how lucky I was," she said, "to have a man like him." I didn't answer, because correcting her would destroy what little peace she had left. And that's when I understood the real cost of his choice, that it wasn't the money, that it wasn't the lie. It was the fact that he left me holding his truth, while she lived inside his memory. That night, I made a decision that I wouldn't expose him. Not yet. Not because he deserved protection, but because some truths don't heal. They only replace one kind of pain with another. I went to sleep knowing something final. My father didn't die, but the man I needed him to be was gone forever. Days passed, then weeks. Life didn't return to normal. It just learned how to move around the truth. I went back to work. Answered the same questions. "How are you holding up? Are you taking care of yourself?" I said yes to all of it. Lying had become second nature. Apparently, it ran in the family. My mother started sleeping in the bed again. That felt like progress. She talked about small things, grocery lists. TV shows. Never him. Normal life, move around the truth, work, questions, lying, family. Mother, bed, progress, small things, grocery lists, TV shows, never him. It was like she'd placed her grief in a locked room and decided not to enter. I carried my own version quietly. At night, I replayed that park bench over and over, his voice, his calm. The way he didn't look back. I wondered if he ever thought about us now, or if we were already archived in his mind. A closed chapter. One evening, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a debit card and a handwritten note. "Use it if you need it. Don't contact me again." No apology. No explanation. Just boundaries. I didn't activate the card. I put it in the back of a drawer and locked it away, because accepting it would mean agreeing to his terms, and I wasn't ready for that. The investigator called a final time. "He settled," he said. "No further movement." "Good," I replied. Silence followed. "You could still report him," he said. "Insurance fraud? Identity manipulation. It's serious." "I know." But I didn't move, because consequences don't just hit the guilty, they ripple outward, and my mother had already drowned once. I started visiting the cemetery again. Not because I believed he was there, but because it was the only place my grief made sense. I stood in front of the headstone and spoke quietly. Not to him. To the version of him that raised me, the one who taught me to ride a bike, who fixed things instead of replacing them, who believed stability mattered. That man deserved to be mourned. The other one could live with his choices. One afternoon, my mother joined me. She placed flowers on the grave and stood silently. "He'd be proud of you," she said suddenly. I felt my throat tighten. "I hope so," I replied. It wasn't a lie. It was just incomplete. That night, I finally deleted his number, blocked the email address, burned the note. Not out of anger, out of acceptance. Some people leave without saying goodbye. Some leave and make sure you never follow. My father did both. And I realized something important. Deleted, blocked, burned, not out of anger. People leave without saying goodbye, never follow. Father realized something important. Closure isn't about answers. It's about deciding where to place your pain. I chose to place mine somewhere he couldn't reach. I thought choosing silence would make things easier. It didn't. It just changed the shape of the pain. There's a strange loneliness that comes with knowing the truth when no one else does. It isolates you in ways grief never could. Grief is shared. This wasn't. Every time my mother laughed at something small, I felt it. Every time she said his name like it still belonged to her life, I felt it. I started measuring my words carefully. Too much distance would raise questions. Too much closeness would feel dishonest. So I stayed somewhere in between. Some nights, I almost told her. The words would sit at the back of my throat, burning. He's alive. He left us. He chose money over family. But then I'd look at her face, tired, softer now, and I'd stop. Because truth isn't always an act of courage. Sometimes it's an act of cruelty. Weeks later, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived from the insurance company. Claim approved. Funds released. My heart sank. He'd won. The system had worked exactly as he designed it to. The money was transferred to an account I didn't recognize. Legally untouchable. Gone. I sat at the table staring at the letter, feeling a kind of numbness I hadn't felt before. This wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. My father hadn't escaped consequences. He had chosen which ones to live with, and he'd decided we'd carry the rest. That night, I dreamed about him, not the man from the park, the old version. He was standing in our kitchen, holding his coffee the way he always did. He looked at me and said, "You'll understand one day." I woke up shaking, because I understood now, and that understanding cost more than money ever could. I started therapy shortly after, not because I was broken, but because I was changing. I was learning how betrayal rewires trust, how silence reshapes love, how family can become a concept instead of a guarantee. Family, concept, guarantee. One session, the therapist asked me a question that stayed with me. "If he came back tomorrow," she said, "what would you do?" I didn't answer right away because I already knew. "I wouldn't open the door," I said. That answer surprised me, not because it was harsh, but because it was peaceful. I wasn't waiting anymore, for an apology, for closure, for him to become someone else. I had stopped expecting the past to fix itself. That realization felt like standing up after carrying a heavy bag for too long. I still thought about him, but differently now. Not as a wound. As a lesson. Some people don't disappear because they're lost. They disappear because they've decided who they want to be. And it no longer includes you. Time doesn't heal everything, but it teaches you what deserves your energy, and what doesn't. Months passed. Not the kind where everything suddenly feels okay, but the kind where pain stops introducing itself every morning. My mother grew quieter in a peaceful way. Not empty, just settled. She stopped waiting for signs, stopped rereading old messages. She began talking about the future again, small plans, small hopes. And I let her, because some healing happens not through truth, but through permission to move forward. I never heard from my father again. No calls, no letters, no shadows. Sometimes I wondered if he thought about us. But then I stopped asking, because answers stopped matching. The day I realized this. A parent's greatest responsibility is not just to provide, but to stay. He failed that, and I survived it. I visit the grave less often now, not because it means less, but because I no longer need it to understand my grief. That stone doesn't mark where my father is. It marks where my innocence ended, and strangely, I'm okay with that. Nothing painful but necessary. You can love someone deeply, and still accept that they chose themselves over you. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you honest. If you're listening to this and carrying a betrayal you never asked for, from family, from someone you trusted, know this: their choices do not define your worth. You don't owe loyalty to someone who abandoned responsibility, and you are allowed to build a life that doesn't include those who broke it. Some stories don't end with justice. They end with clarity, and sometimes that's enough. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something you couldn't quite name, take a moment, like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell icon, because more stories like this are coming. Stories about truth, betrayal, survival, and the parts of life we rarely talk about. And the next one might hit even closer.